Welcome to the Dunamis EQ podcast. Today, we are joined by Richard Washington, the founder of Tech Talent. Thank you so much, Richard, for joining us today.
Thank you, totally, for having me. Absolute pleasure.
My absolute honour and pleasure as well. So Richard was introduced to me by my good friend Joseph Green, who they were working together on getting Joseph a role, and he was raving about Richard. He's like, this is the best recruiter I've ever had. Like, he was just telling me all this stuff you were sending to him, the value you were adding, and I was like, he sounds perfect for my podcast. So firstly, thank you for the amazing work that you do in placing people in amazing roles. And yeah, thank you for being here. So would you mind telling our listeners a little bit about yourself, talking a bit about your journey of how you got to where you are today?
Yes, there you go. I told you there'd be dogs. So, I
Right
live
on cue.
my business, Tech Talent, and I live and work is based. Let me put my words back in. So my business, Tech Talent, is based in a dog hotel. So my wife runs Rusty's Dog Hotel, where we have every day about 5 dogs, whether for daycare or boarding. So
Wow.
it's impossible that I will speak with someone without there being this beautiful orchestra of barks. So my story, it's quite interesting actually, because I my favorite interview question whenever I interview someone for a role for a company that I'm hiring for is to tell me their story from birth to being in the room with me today.
Wow.
And
Okay, answer your own question.
I know, right? I know. And I've only been asked that question once when we did like a bit of an off-site on my old CEO's boat. And I was like, I've never been asked this question, but I've asked it probably about 5,000 times. So my story, I was born in 1983 in a little town called Chichester on the south coast of England.
No, I went to school in Chichester, by the way.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I did.
What a lovely place, right? That beautiful Roman wall. Lovely little place. Lovely
the cathedral.
Place.
Yeah. Sorry, I interrupt you. Go.
Lovely place. So, and that kind of that sort of like small town kind of echoed really my first 18 years of life. Grew up in the West Coast, or the West Sussex. West Coast of America would be much cooler to be fair. And had a really nice life. 2.4 children, wonderful parents, really like no sort of traumas or anything that really shaped my character. Had a lovely, loving family and a really nice life. But what I would say is I was never really passionate about anything at school. I kind of cruised through all of school, being like a kind of B student for everything. Got really passionate about a few things, namely Football Manager. Became absolutely obsessed with that game from about 9 years old through to probably about 25, to be completely honest with you. And a few sports became really obsessed with as well, but wasn't really engaged with much of it. It was much more about the social side for me. And then I did the classic thing that most people do when they're 17, 18, which is I don't really want to get a job. I'm going to go to university. And so picked a degree in leisure marketing at Bournemouth University.
Really?
Yeah, which is it's funny because I do kind of work in marketing, which is one of the few people that I know that does what I do who actually kind of studied it. But leisure, why leisure? It's like the disposable income part of marketing, where I was definitely in corporate now. And again, same thing, cruised through university, didn't really pay much attention, failed my first year, having way too much fun. And then finished university after 5 years. And when, again, don't really know what I want to do for a job, big question, let's go and work in a nightclub. So I worked in a nightclub on the front door as a VIP host. So I was basically
very leisure marketing. That actually matches, yeah.
Total alignment. And so my first night in Elements nightclub in Bournemouth, if anyone's local and old enough to know what that means, was to let Portsmouth Football Club and West Ham Football Club players into the VIP lounge. So I was like meeting, Teddy Sheringham and Andy Cole, and I was like, this is the best job in the world. And then it kind of went downhill from
Tagged after that. Yeah.
And then I had probably the first day that turned my life around about 9 months into that job, which was, it was like a Wednesday night, about 1 a.m. I'm on the front door with a bunch of really great people who I loved to work with, who were all a bit older than me. I was 22 at this time, and they're all like, in their mid-30s, and they all hated the job. So they're great people, really fun. Or most of them had degrees, but they kind of just got into these jobs, and then it became the thing they had to do to pay the mortgage, and they kind of fell out of love with it. So all they did was talk about, you know, how terrible the clientele was, the customers, the weather, the hours, the pay. It was just this constant massive gap around not being fulfilled, and it was like just part of the culture. And I just thought, if I don't make something happen here, I could become one of these fantastic people that's kind of lost their way and got into a path that they don't really love. And I knew I wanted to work in a place that I was really passionate about, with people that I was proud to work with, doing something that I was proud to do. And so I was like, right, I'm going to go and find an opportunity, and then did what most people do when they realize after university they're going to try and apply for a job, which is, I'm going to walk into a 35 grand a year job in marketing, and then applied for all these jobs and didn't get anywhere with any of them. And I realized now, obviously I was terrible at interviewing at that stage. But at the time I was like, there's no experience. Catch 22. And so I realized I needed to find a company that trained people. I had no skills fundamentally. I'd spent 22 years of my life kind of cruising and enjoying myself. So I needed to find a place that really had a strong training program. And I found this really cool company called EIMS, who were just a UK company at that point, and were just opening up a Barcelona office, had ambitions to open up in America and over in Asia, and met these amazing groups of people from all over the world. It's pan-European marketing agency. And I was like, my God, this is an incredible place to learn, and just fell into got one my place in that company, then kind of just fell into this career around sales and marketing, and just absolutely loved it. It was the thing I was best at, without really like much effort to try and get good quite quickly. Obviously, there was a hell of a lot of learning after that, but kind of hit the ground really, really quickly running. Was in lots of competitions to become top of the leaderboard and win the weekly meal prize, and credits towards the overperformers conferences where we traveled to like Egypt and Cyprus and all these wonderful places around the world, and Morocco. Just absolutely loved it. And after doing that for 9 months in that role, doing various lead generation projects and marketing and inside sales projects, I had the opportunity to apply for a team management role. I was unsure at that point as to whether I wanted to go down a sales route or a leadership route. But my manager at the time, amazing guy that recruited me, called Mark Phelps, probably my first major mentor in life, spotted within me some leadership traits which I would never have seen myself. Obviously, he didn't know everything about my 20-year football manager career at this stage. And I was obviously going to be a world-class manager. But it's like really simple things, like he would see me going for lunch and like take about 4 people with me. Obviously, I just didn't like to be alone. But there's some leadership skills here. And I just started to get involved with training new starters, and I really, really like that side of things. So he encouraged me to go down the leadership route, got that opportunity. Funnily enough, when I applied for that role, you had to send what's called an email of motivation or letter of motivation. And in my letter, I distinctly remember writing, I do not expect to get this, but my outcome is to learn from this process what I need to learn so I'm ready next time. And the reason why I didn't think it was, one, imposter syndrome, definitely. I was the youngest person going for it out of a group of about 9 people applying for that management role. The newest in the company out of everyone that applied for that role. And a lot of the people going for it were my mentors, people that had trained me. So I just didn't think there was a chance I was going to go and get it. Plus, you know, probably without even knowing the terminology, growth mindset, knew that actually going for something and failing wasn't the end of the world if you learn some stuff that helped you to prepare for next time. But luckily got that opportunity, became a team manager, did that for about a year and a half, 2 years, then had an opportunity to become an operations manager. So managing the managers, which was a really interesting transition. Again, youngest and newest person in the team, 23 at this age, became the manager of a bunch of people who were recruiting me when I joined the business and training me.
What were some of the challenges you had with doing
that? Mainly just in my brain.
Okay.
It was like, right, I'm going to be managing people who recruited me and trained me.
And look up to these people.
And I look up to these people. I asked them for help. You know, I didn't have all the answers, wasn't the smartest by any stretch. I think I was just very, very moldable, super competitive, not in a there's only, what's what Jim Rohn says, right? There's two ways to be the tallest tree in the jungle. One is chop all the other trees down.
Yeah.
And
The other is to grow.
to grow to become the tallest tree. So I was always really, really focused on that. But it was really around my head. But I got it quite quickly. You just had to give people respect rather than I am your manager, which means I tell you what to do. It's I'm here to guide and to ask questions and to try and support where I can, but you're going to be better than me in many things. So it's kind of like building a team of strengths rather than people to delegate to. But it was definitely a massive transition. I learned lots of things through my leadership career from doing things the wrong way and making mistakes, and then did that role for 4 years. Got to travel to Barcelona and helped to set up that office, which was an incredible experience. Absolutely loved it. Spent about 3 months in Barcelona, and then got an opportunity to become a business unit director, so managing the UK business unit, and went through a 18-month training program to do that, which is really cool. I've not heard of many businesses that offer
That's a long time.
That kind of level of training program. It was really new for them to create this role. So they put a load of effort and time into developing us.
So were you doing that training full time for 18 months, or was that part of you doing like a day here, a day there?
On top of being ops manager, yeah. Okay. Exactly. So part of it, you're basically acting BUD for that time, but you're going through a load of training programs as well.
That's really good.
Some funny stories, which I might share, and then and then got to spend some time over in Auckland. Spent a year in Miami in 2017, which was an amazing experience. And then a really big thing happened, which is that I went in January and I'd signed up for a 5-year visa, with a 1-year commitment at least to build this business unit in Miami. We just bought a business in Fort Lauderdale and we were moving into a bigger office in Miami. So obviously wanted that opportunity.
Absolutely.
So moved in the January, and in the March, I was back home for a family 60th birthday, my uncle, and for a friend's wedding. And I was back for that weekend, and my sister passed away when I was at home with my family. She was only 37 at this age. I was like 33 or 32. She had a 5-year-old daughter who was in the room when it all happened. I basically woke up to my parents screaming, which was horrendous. And it's like definitely the first piece of major trauma I had in my life. So that happened just like completely, really unexpectedly. She did have a underlying health condition, and it was basically a heart thing that ended up causing it, but she just passed away in the night. So that changed everything for me, because I'd realized that I'd spent from 23 until 33, so a good sort of 10-year sprint, just focused on my career above everything else. It was all I cared about, partly because I just loved it. So I just threw myself into it completely. It wasn't like I am going to have an amazing career. I just loved it and had this opportunity to grow in an amazing company. But I realized I hadn't done anything really with my life. I was 33. And I was in Miami as a business unit director, which was really cool. But what if I was to pass away now? I hadn't done anything. I hadn't really, achieved anything of real impact. Certainly didn't have a family, didn't have children, hadn't really done anything that I really wanted to, other than just going down a path that I really enjoyed going down. And so I realized at that point my values changed. The company was really good during that stage. I had like a sort of 5 weeks off without having to go back and look after my parents, because obviously they were going through a lot of trauma and we were looking after a 5-year-old. And then I went to America, but it wasn't the same. I wasn't the same, was really what happened. And I realized that work had become probably the 3rd or 4th biggest priority in my life, where it's always number one. So it kind of reset my brain, and I tried to continue going, but I was going through grief at that stage without really addressing it properly. And it was only really when I started getting some counselling through BetterHelp, which is a really good way of getting counselling, for busy people. Would recommend it if anyone's interested. That I realised I needed to be home. At the same time all this was happening, so probably around the sort of July, my mum, as part of her grief, just basically went into a spiral of depression and got got sectioned under the Mental Health Act to go into a mental health hospital and was there for 26 weeks. So you can imagine I'm in Miami.
Oh, yeah.
My dad's looking after a 5-year-old, lost his daughter, and his wife's
And
in
his wife.
mental health hospital.
Wow.
And to be fair, they were really good. They basically went through a process of like electric current treatment, which fixed her, but it took until like the May of the year after. So she was in there for 26 weeks. And I knew that I had to come home. I was like, what am I doing in Miami? So as soon as that year was up, I came back to England, did another year in the business. First 6 months was really good. Last 6 months, it all started to crumble around me as I wasn't focused at the level that you have to be in that kind of role with that much responsibility. It's like a £6 million business unit with 80 staff. You've got to be really, really
dialed in,
run that sort of thing. That I basically was failing and things were failing around me, and I kind of refused to see it. Partly I just didn't want to see the reality of how little I was in control. And so I was given the choice, you either step down into the ops role that you were doing before, but it would be a step back, or take redundancy. So I took redundancy and used it as a bit of a chance to pause, reflect, and think, right, I really want to start a business. I've always wanted to start a business. It's my dream. Everyone does, but if I'm going to have it now, it's now. I've got a 3-month window to try and start a business. So I tried to start an e-commerce business, drop shipping art canvases, and failed miserably. But learned loads about going from being in quite a senior leadership position with lots of teams and lots of people that you're responsible for. You're so busy dealing with stuff all the time that you just don't have any time to think, to being like, you're solely responsible for everything now. Be the graphic designer, be the financial person, be the business person. So learned a load in that 9 months of trying to start this business, but they've basically run out of cash and realized I had to go and do something different. And I realized at that point, whilst I wanted to be entrepreneurial, I didn't know how. I didn't have an idea. And I knew that I'd made enough mistakes in that 9 months of focusing on the wrong thing and wasting time that I had to go and find something different. So I had a couple of choices. One was, do I become a salesperson, a sales leader? Do I kind of continue what I was doing before and try and do it for a vendor and make some brilliant money and then maybe do a passion project on the side? Or do I just go for a passion project? Do I go into like graphic design, or unfortunately full-time gaming wasn't so popular back then, but manage a full-time gamer, something like that. And I looked around for the jobs, and I just couldn't find anything that I liked. So what I realized is I was asking the wrong question. I was asking, what do I want to do? And I realized that actually for me, who I want to do it with is a much more powerful question. So my biggest lesson there was, if you don't like the answers that you're getting in life, change the question. So I changed the question to who, and it was obvious to me who. I'd met a guy called Steve Bolton, an incredible human being, really into philanthropy, does a load of stuff to ending homelessness and working with crisis and supporting people locally to get off, basically get jobs and get back into homes, all this sorts of good stuff, as well as having a few really successful businesses. We'd done a bit of mentoring about 8 years before. We went to a Jay Abraham event up in London, like a mastermind that he'd organised with Jay Abraham, who's the $1 billion coach basically, and coach of Tony Robbins and people like that. And I thought, if I could work with Steve, I know that regardless of what I end up doing, it will be amazing. If I can be around people like that in their orbit, I'll go on an amazing journey, and then I'll probably find the answer. So I sent him a message on Facebook and just said, look, Steve, I'm available. My dream is to work with you. I'll never forget your philosophy around be more, do more, have more, and give more. My dream is to start a business with you. And he said, yeah, cool, let's meet for lunch. Next day I was up at his house meeting him and another amazing entrepreneur called Richard Jackson, just to talk about their plans and their strategy for the business. And then the next day I was up in London meeting the Bolt Digital team. And he said, look, I don't have a job for you, but we have a need. We're spending half our time recruiting or dealing with some staff issues. We've got ambitious growth plans. Could you help us to fix that problem? And I said, yeah, sure, definitely. I'd love to do that. Here's what I would do. Basically a 3-slider. Here's how I would deal with recruitment.
Love a 3-slider.
Process. Here's how I would deal with onboarding to make sure that we get people in and then make them successful. And here's how I would create a leadership development program. And they said, cool, let's go for it. So I just started working with Steve in loads of different areas of the business. But the major thing was build this bulk digital team and make the process really great. And so we innovated a lot of the stuff that we'd done for the sort of 12 years before when I was at EIMS, and then just made it very cool London digital marketing, big event kind of focused ways of dealing with recruitment, putting candidates first. And we realized that that was a really great way of recruiting, completely different. The feedback from candidates was they'd never seen anything like it before. They wished everyone had done it before. Finally, someone was innovating in recruitment. It was a hell of a lot of fun for us. We brought in amazing people into the business, totally value aligned, culturally aligned, amazing, talented, creative performance marketers and salespeople. And then COVID hit. And like, I don't think you'll speak to anyone who doesn't have a COVID hit story. But in the world of marketing and digital marketing, that meant that everyone went, whoa, what do we do now? Pause. So the business had to reshape a little bit. Obviously, it boomed again. Everything in beauty and e-commerce boomed really, really quickly afterwards as people wanted to take care of themselves. But we realized that was our opportunity to try and start to do this as a business. We could take all the stuff that we built in terms of processes and systems around recruitment and start to do them for clients. And so we started working with one of the bulk digital clients on a marketing role, which was really successful. And then we just started going out into the world to try and create a bit of a client base and learn all the stuff that we knew we didn't know. So we did that for 2 years, was really successful, as well as lots of failures, lots of learnings, but did enough of a great job in that time, and carved out enough of a network and, reputation to make the decision literally at the beginning of April to launch my own business, which is Tick Talent, still with the support of Steve and David, who's the chief financial officer, but my own business. And that kind of brings me up to today. But I'm definitely way over time, and I would have failed myself on the interview.
So do you know actually how long in the interview would you expect someone to answer that question for?
Well, this is why I love the question. So there's no answer. I'm not saying right unless they do it in 5 minutes. It's not that. It gives people a chance to tell a story. Yeah. And so in sales and marketing, which is the roles that we recruit for and leadership roles, it's not really about do you have a chartership in engineering. It's
how do you tell a story? And to be honest, I loved hearing your story. I really enjoyed hearing your story. So I'm like, go as long as you want at any point.
How vulnerable are you prepared to be? Yeah. Are you fun? Do you what do you focus on? Is there big parts that you've skipped? So there's no right or wrong answer. It's more, is it engaging? Do I find it interesting? And then obviously from that point, then you can just focus on wherever else they've covered, rather than having a sort of set of 20 HR vetted interview questions that you're going to ask every single candidate.
Because I think, to be honest, I'm going to ask more people that question on the podcast and be like, from birth to now, tell me your life story, see where it goes.
You have to pre-frame it. So there's a bit ahead of that, which is important, because people would just think you're nuts. And I'm not saying if you interviewed 90% of the people that I've interviewed, they'd probably think I'm nuts, just because it's so weird and Steve says wacky way of interviewing people. But you have to pre-frame it. So obviously when someone walks into an interview, what are they feeling?
A little bit nervous.
Really nervous, right? They spend a load of time preparing. So they spend all this time reading through the website, reading through whatever they can to try and learn about the business. They're full of information. So they've overloaded themselves with information, and they might have, if it's like they're a bit out of practice, they've spent some time researching how to answer difficult interview questions. Yeah. So they're going, please ask me about my weaknesses. So they're full of stuff, and they're nervous, particularly if it's face-to-face, which obviously all interviews were face-to-face before COVID. And so they're really nervous. You've got to make people feel comfortable. So the first thing is make them feel really comfortable. Make sure you offer them a drink, bring them a water, make sure they're sitting comfortably, maybe walk them around the office to meet a few people, get them feel real comfortable. And then just ask them a couple of questions about the process they've had so far. I'm talking, this is kind of like the final interview rather than the first interview. So get them to tell the story of how they found it, all that sort of stuff. And then this the way I'm giving all my secrets away now, but I suppose that's the value of content, right? Exactly. It's the way I would always frame an interview is I would say, right, for this interview to be worth your time and worth my time, because they're just as important, I want to do a deal. And
Okay.
then they say, okay.
Slightly hesitant. Okay.
Yeah,
What deal do
exactly.
you want?
Okay. And then probably about 10% of people say, what's the deal? But everyone else says, okay.
Okay.
I say it's a two-part deal. The first is I want you to be as honest with me as you would be with the person you're closest to in the world. So be as honest. Just be totally yourself. Be totally honest. Answer how you would actually answer. Don't try and be this like cardboard cutout version of yourself trying to pass an interview. Be yourself. And just be totally honest. There's no right or wrong answer. I'd much prefer the truth. And if you ask me anything, I'll be totally honest. I won't be whatever character I'm playing. I will be me. And then the second part of the deal is to be you on purpose. It's so easy to be in interview mode and forget to kind of let your personality shine. And I think that the worst thing in the world is that you wouldn't get a job because someone didn't see enough of your personality. And if you did get a job where you didn't show your true personality, and then when
then
you
it comes to work,
everyone was like, whoa, you're in a place that's going to stifle you. So be yourself on purpose, and then obviously shake on it and then go, right. First question from birth to being in the room today. What's the story of your life? And it works really, really well because we can unpick it together because you might have a different perspective, but it just gets people you've got an upfront verbal contract on something. You've framed exactly how you want people to be, which is really comfortable, really open, and that it's probably going to be a bit of a strange interview. So let your guard down and be yourself, and then just go with the flow.
I think I really like the concept of you be honest with me, I'll be honest with you.
Yeah.
Because I feel like sometimes what's really hard about interviews from both sides is that I'm trying to suss out that person in the space of like an hour and then commit to working with them for however long is going to happen after that. It's actually really, really hard. So I really like that. Having a verbal contract in terms of this is my expectation of you, this is your expectation of me. Let's both bring our honest selves, because if we are going to work together, like I want to know, like, am I actually going to enjoy working with you or am I not? Like, let's actually find that out. So I really, really like that. And I think the tell me your life story, it's like everybody knows their life story.
Only they do, right? There's no right or wrong answer, is there?
Exactly. Like, that they can be comfortable. And what I loved about watching you is watching the emotion as you went through the different parts of your life story.
Sure.
And I feel like that's a really great way to bond with people. So I really like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And the interview's a two-way, right? And I think most people forget 100%. This. Because weirdly, it's probably the area of leadership training that people focus on the least. It's like, you watch someone do an interview and then you basically copy it. So you've basically got this kind of like, bodge job of 20 years worth of bad habits that have just been passed down. And it's always from the perspective, I am making a decision on you. Very few people treat it as a two-way process. So probably half the interviews, myself and the old MD of Bolt Digital, who actually now works in one of Stephen Bartlett's businesses, amazing guy called Luke Cotley-Smith. Probably about half the interviews we ended up doing, we used to do that intro and then say, right, cool, your interview, ask me questions. Please interview us. Do you want to work with us?
How do people respond to
that? Most people are quite surprised, but then it often forms a much better interview because you're not in control. And so the path they take it and the questions that they ask are really revealing. And if they can get you really talking, then they're probably going to be a blooming brilliant inquisitive marketer, great salesperson, or great leader. So it works really well. But obviously some people go a bit rabbit in the headlights. But again, it's all about the making people feel warm and open and comfortable before they start. But yeah, most people don't ask people to. Here's the worst question in the interview ever. Do you have any questions? Closed question. Everyone says no. So that's if you at the end of an interview go, right, cool. So we've asked all of our questions now. Do you have any questions? I heard so many people do this. So many people. Rather than even just the simple change of saying, what questions do you have? The classic training. You're doing a training
open question.
If you're in a training, you go, any questions? No one's got any questions.
No one's got.
If you say, what questions do you have? It makes a massive difference. But actually having a whole section, half the interview, I might really believe that half of the interview should be them interviewing you. And it's fine to tell people up front, right? I want half of this interview to be you to be telling us. Maybe even, when you send the invite, first 30 minutes you interview us, second 30 minutes we interview you. It just makes it two-way, which is really important because, like you say, you're making a decision on someone to work together for a number of years. They are too. And I think if you get that right, you end up getting the decision right much more often. Obviously, it's not an exact science, but you definitely increase the odds if you make it natural.
That's so interesting, because I was talking to someone and they were saying about, should I save all my questions for the end of the interview or all the way through? And I'm like, ideally, it would just be a conversation that you can be asking questions back and forth. But I'm also aware that some people, like, they want to get through their questions and then they want you to follow up, like, do you have any questions? Like, I've been taught you always have questions, right? You should always ask questions. When someone asks, do you have any questions? I'm like, in my head, it's like, ask questions. So it's so interesting that people say no. It's so
exactly. Well, most people say the most common answer. It'll be interesting to hear other people's view on this, but in my experience, when someone says, do you have any questions? Someone will probably go, no, you've answered all the questions throughout the process. And then they're going to fail the interview as a result of that. You've got no questions. And again, we work in sales, marketing, and leadership roles, which is all about your curiosity. It's your greatest strength. So if someone's got no questions, they're always going to fail that interview. Or they've got a very, very clear list of pre-written questions which don't really follow up from the conversation, which is important because you don't want to walk away going, well, that was a great chat, but I didn't find out the commission structure, the leadership style is going to be like what the vision of the company is. I don't know anything. So it is important to do that, but yeah, it's not something that you should rush or be too premeditated. That's just my opinion.
Do you know what? So before we do this podcast, people are always like, can you send me a list of questions?
Yeah.
And I'm like, no, because I don't actually know what you're going to say. So until I know what you're going to say, any questions I have will be very vague. But what really comes good is like, okay, you said this and I can ask you about that. So that's why I'm like, I don't actually want to send you questions before because I just want to see what comes out of your mouth and see where we go,
Yeah, exactly. Which is more fun. And on a podcast, you can do that, right? Because at the end of the day, if it's entertaining and you've learned something, then it's great.
Great. Yeah.
Whereas if you're making a decision about your future, it does become a bit more serious, doesn't it? But it should feel as natural as possible. But I just think it's one of those things. Interviews are generally terrible, and most recruitment processes are horrendous, absolutely horrendous from the perspective of candidates. That's why we created this business, because we just really think it's so broken. I know it's very fashionable to say that something is broken, and we're the knights.
But you're actually fixing it, though. That's the thing.
Trying to fix it. But I think because I never came from a recruitment background, my role was always to find people for my teams, and from all around the world in different languages. Like, probably 80% of the people I interviewed were speaking to me in English as a second language. So you have to really be very specific and deliberate in the way that you communicate. But I just think most people interview terribly, and they make the process for candidates so painful. It's so structured. Section 1, HR interview. And what's the first question you often get asked in an interview when you first apply for a company?
Why do you want to work here?
Yeah. Why do you want to work here? I don't know. I hit easy apply on LinkedIn. I literally clicked a button. It's that easy, right? So most people go, why would you expect that they want to work in your business? There's this massive entitlement that someone applies for your company. They're yours, and it's your decision to rule them in or out. You are God. Like the Roman, It's not. An application for me is a hand raiser. I think I want to learn some more. So the fundamental flip that we believe, like to my very, very core, is that a company's job at the start of an interview process is to sell the company. Sell the company. That's why we do talent events. We bring a group of people into the office to meet the team and learn from the founders why they started the business. Where are they going as a business? What's the vision? Why is it important? What's the difference they're making in the world? Why do they need people on the ship? What's the expectation? That where you're going and why you started is everything. And I think most job adverts, I'm going off on a bit of a tangent now, but most job adverts are just copy and pasted job descriptions. And they're horrendous. A job description is not purposed at advertising or selling a role. It's like a ship. Like, let's say you were trying to recruit, sailors to join your ship, crew to join your ship, and you we're just basically selling the ship. Our ship's got 8 gyms, 16 restaurants, sun deck, limitless bars. Your room's got this view. It's got this bed. This is the mattress. This is the, the thread count of the sheets. That's what a job description feels like. Is that detailed? Whereas it should be, well, where's the boat going? If you tell me that you've got the most amazing boat in the world, but it's going to be moored in Southampton for the next 6 years, I'm not getting on it.
No, thank you.
But if you tell me this is a world cruise and we're going here, and that me joining here has the path to become something else as part of this journey, that's where people want to go. So I think that the psychology is you have to give people reasons to want to join you. You shouldn't ask why do you want to join. I'd love it if someone said, I honestly don't know. I know nothing about your business. Tell me about it. And then for the person to be like, okay, this is an opportunity, rather than, oh my God, they turned up completely unprepared.
Unprepared, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. What other questions? Let's unpick this. So they've asked you why you want to join. What other questions are you going to get asked in your standard interview?
What do you know about the company?
What do you know about the company? And in realistic terms, what has that person done to learn about the business?
Gone on the website.
Gone on your website. It's like, they might as well say, tell me what our website says. Because that's all they want to know. It's just hilarious. So they ask you.
Have they prepared? That's what it is.
They are the 2 questions. And I see so much on LinkedIn about, making sure you're really prepared for an interview. I think it doesn't deal with the fundamental problem that people are turning up for an interview. Probably with 15 other interviews booked in, after 100 job applications, expecting to hear a no, and expecting the same questions. Why, it's ridiculous. You're only ever going to get a superficial answer. Anyone says that I would love to work for your business because you won this award and you're featured here on the Gartner Magic Quadrant. Like, nonsense. Absolute nonsense.
So how would you recommend that a candidate goes through the process with emotional intelligence and shows their emotional intelligence even if the questions aren't great?
So the questions are unlikely to be great. So I wouldn't even have an expectation that they are. How do they do it with emotional intelligence? That's a difficult question. I mean, they can do it with just, how can they do it in a human way, right? So if I'd apply for a job, obviously this is like utopian, the way of describing it, how it should be. But in reality, people apply for jobs. They hear back from 16% of the jobs they apply for. That's the data. 16% you'll hear back. That's not get an interview. It's hear back. So 84% of the time you never get a response for a job. So by the time you actually do get an interview, and obviously you can be much more sniper around the way that you do that, but if you had an interview booked in with the company, probably the best thing you could do is reach out to a couple of people that work in that company. Most powerful thing ever is to reach out and say, hey, I've applied for this role, I've got an interview, I'd love to know a bit more about your experience. What do you like about it? What's it really like? What's the culture like? What advice would you give me to sort of show my best self? If it's a sales role, what's the product like? What feedback do you get from customers? How many of you guys are on target? What's the greatest thing about the company? And if there's one challenge, what is it? So I think if you can get some insights from someone who doesn't have a vested interest in the interview process, then that's the best way you could possibly do it. And it's more powerful than like kind of reading the marketing collateral, because it's obviously going to be incredibly heavily biased what a company says about it. You can obviously go onto Glassdoor and get some reviews, but who goes onto Glassdoor and goes, I had an amazing experience, I'm going to write my amazing review? Most people go on there to vent if they hadn't had the chance to do so. So I think Glassdoor and RepView and all those things, they're great, but you're kind of looking for clusters. Was there a really tight cluster of negative reviews around one specific time? Because that's more interesting. You could say, I noticed that there was a bunch of feedback around this at this time, but then it kind of stopped. Can you tell me more about that? And if a company's really open and they can tell you about, this is what we did wrong, because no company's perfect, like none of us are perfect. So they're going to have made mistakes. So if they're really open about the way they've made mistakes, what they've done to rectify it, and what they learned, that's probably an amazing company to work for. If they're like, oh no, those were very disgruntled employees, we don't talk about them, then they're probably a really bad company to work for. And if let's say you ask the team what it's like working in a company, and they're really nice, probably a great company, right, with a great culture. And if they don't respond if they're short with you, if they're rude, it's probably a bad culture and a bad environment. So you probably learn a lot. If they've got a sales line to phone up and ask some questions, even better, right? Because then you can actually speak to someone. How do you get treated on that first call? And if it's a face-to-face interview, how do you get treated in reception if you still go into a reception, if anyone has any of those anymore? But do people walk past and say hello? Do you get welcomed nicely, or does kind of everyone stare at you like you're some kind of alien that's walked in the door? So I think there's probably a load of clues before you even turn up, and then get asked whatever questions you're going to go and get asked, which would help you to prepare. But I think what does everyone want to hire? Someone that's interested and prepared and proactive. So if you've done a bit of prep to find out what the company's like, I think most people would find that incredibly attractive to want to hire you, versus that you're really good at handling objections and tough questions and coming out smelling great.
Because I think what I was trying to understand is, so it also depends on what's your definition of emotional intelligence, right? So the quite common themes are like, how do you deal with your emotions, and how do you kind of interact with other people, understand what they want, what are they doing, and then kind of that interplay. So when I was asking about going through those questions with that, what I'm trying to understand is, let's say you're getting pretty poor questions, right?
Yeah.
How can you deal with that in such a way that's good, graceful, but then you can still bring out some of the gold, you know, even if the questions are pretty poor? So like if you were asked, about how would you, why do you want to work here? How would you answer that question?
Yeah. Well, I mean, you should have an answer, right? But
probably, yeah.
If you've got through to the interview, then you probably should have an answer. But I just think, and again, it's like, how do you handle it with grace? Don't be annoyed about it, right? Probably me saying that it's a bad question is probably putting in people's brains that they should find it offensive that someone would have the audacity to ask them why they should work in a business. But like, it's a person asking the question. I think what is a bad question would be a question that's unclear. So like, I just went on a 5-minute tangent after you asking a question. I didn't ask, what would you like, what's the reason for you asking the question? What prompted the question? What's the theory behind the question?
So do you think I asked a bad question?
No, I don't know. You got me talking. Is it a bad question? But yeah, I think if a question's bad, it's unclear fundamentally. So just ask more questions around it. When you say, I'm trying to think of a terrible question. Why do you want to work here? And you could say, well, I can definitely answer that question. But what I'd really like to understand is, from the people that you've hired, what's the most common reason that they say they love working in your business? Might be a good way of doing it, but then you're kind of answering a question with a question. I just think if people ask you a question, then answer it as best you can. And if they ask you 10 terrible questions, then maybe it's just the wrong company for you to work in, if you find them terrible.
And I think what's interesting for me is that we've all kind of, like you said, we've all gone into interviews, watched other people do them, and been told this is how you do interviews. So I think that part of it for me is that like people do the best that they can with what they have, if that makes sense. So they might just not know how to do an interview. And if I can do some of the stuff that you're saying in terms of, okay, open up with a bit more questions and things like that, depending on how they respond, for me is probably what would determine if I wanted to work there or not. Because like I said, if they're short, if they shut it down, then I know that actually even me being curious, they don't really value that. And that's where I think it's a really good thing to do anyway, even just to understand like, okay, how do they take stuff like that if people are asking questions and things like that? Like, is it okay? Does it get shut down? Does it get expanded? Are they like, oh, actually, good question? And are they curious? Are they interesting?
Yeah, it's a good point. I think it's funny. It's like, I've studied communication and listened to so many of my own calls and other people's calls, like to the tiniest detail of intonation and the way that questions are phrased. So I'm obsessed with the subject to the point where it's like if you're a painter and you walked into a room that hadn't been painted very well, all you see is the mistakes,
the imperfections.
Yeah, exactly. Like at golf, like I'm a bad enough golf player that I only remember my good shots, those 2 shots in the round. Whereas where I've got friends who are really, really high handicap golfers or low handicap golfers, and they just rue those 2 bad shots. So I think it's a bit like I've exposed myself to a level of curiosity around the subject of questioning and communication that I find anything that's I find it really obvious of things that are the same, repetitive, done without much thought. Whereas most people, people aren't doing it for bad intentions, and if they are, then get the hell out of there.
I really liked that switch between "Do you have any questions?" to even something like "What would you like to ask me?"
Yeah,
Like I that's so subtle, but that's so nice. I really like that. I'm stealing that.
Yeah, steal it. And then another, when I was in Miami, I worked with an amazing guy called Adam Rosenberg, and he taught me 2 words. Obviously, I knew the words, but I never really learned in this structure. But the power of what else? What else? So he used to just say, "What else?" And it's amazing how much "what else" you get when you ask the question. So if you say to someone, "What would you like to ask me? What questions do you have?" And they say, "Da da 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 da," and you answer it, have a conversation. You go, "Cool. What else?" And if you just keep saying "what else," it's amazing how much more people give you. So I think that's really, really powerful, rather than having your top 5 questions that you're going to ask, because then basically after you've asked your first question, you're just waiting for your chance to ask the second, and that just doesn't really flow very well.
That's really good.
What's the best interview questions you've ever been asked?
So my interview experience is very, very limited, right? So I basically, out of university, got into the grad scheme at Sky, so I had interviews through that. And then I've had maybe 1 or 2 interviews since then, so I'm not very well versed, and they've all been internal. So
And have you done much hiring for your own teams?
Yeah, but I would say from listening to you, I'm probably not a very good interviewer. So
what questions did you really love to ask? You always had an interesting conversation off the back of it.
So some of the questions that I like are some of the, like the competency-based ones, like give me an example of a time where you've been able to X, Y, Z, and giving people that kind of space as to to talk a bit more about experiences, because I like seeing how people engage with their memories. Right. So seeing how someone recalls something and can bring that back, and then you can see them kind of battling with, do I say this? Do I not say that? Like, I really like that kind of thing, to be honest. Because you know what you said about when you applied for that job, and you're like, because I know that if I don't get it, it's okay because it's learning and that kind of thing. That's how I love that, because that kind of person is going to be fine whatever they're in. You know? So I like questions that really get to understand, like, where is someone coming from? What are their motivations? How do they deal with failure? Like, what does failure look like for them? Because even that is those are the kind of questions that I like having answered.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, I like it. And are there any questions that you always, did you have to ask set questions? Were you told you have to ask these questions, and then there was something you just knew that you didn't really love to ask, or not?
So we have this big interview builder thing where it's got if you want to ask about leadership, here are some questions you should ask. If you want to ask about this, here are some questions you should ask. And you do get some good answers if you can ask good follow-up questions. I think is what I've been really trying to learn how to do, is okay, how do I follow up to really get further and to understand the core of why they did kind of thing.
Interesting. Yeah. So what I realized, what I found out afterwards, is that Elon Musk asks that birth to now
does
question, which I didn't know. I never even heard of Elon Musk when we started doing it. But then he asks, what's your greatest achievement in life? And then he asks, and what was your role in that? And he wants to know about this great thing that you've done. You are a high performance person, but he gets into the real detail around how much you were involved in it. And unless people can talk through the tiny details of things they did, things they owned, then they weren't responsible for it, because everyone's been involved in I suppose when you apply for Tesla or SpaceX, you've all been involved in billion-dollar projects with massive things.
I don't think I have. SpaceX people, yes.
Yeah, exactly right. The real specifics of the role that you played within that, and I find that really interesting.
That's such an interesting concept, because I don't think I could tell you what my greatest achievement is. I've never actually sat down and thought of what would I say is my greatest achievement. I don't think I can answer that question. Could you?
I think probably 2 weeks ago getting married.
Good answer. Very good answer. Congratulations, by the way.
Thank you so much. Yeah, it was absolutely amazing. Perfect day, and I'm very, very proud. And just before my 40th birthday, so quite late. So that was amazing. But loads of things. Very proud of being, the youngest manager in the company, being a 30-year-old director of a business, traveling to America, setting up a business. All the people that I've had the opportunity to work with. There's so there's so many things. A single moment, I'd have to say.
But what's the greatest though? That's the thing.
The greatest, yeah, definitely getting married. That's my
Okay.
greatest achievement. Yeah.
Okay. Good. Good. So, emotional intelligence.
Yeah.
What does it mean to you? Because I don't actually know what it means to you.
Yeah. Sure. It's a good question. So I definitely have a higher emotional intelligence than I do an IQ.
Okay.
Definitely. And I've done a few IQ tests and I'm pretty much bang in the middle of IQ. But I know through experience that I have a probably higher than average level of emotional intelligence. And I don't know where that comes from. I think I have probably more of a female brain than a male brain, in that I'm much more intuition led, much more people focused than pragmatic, much more sort of, I think in feelings a lot. I pick up on energy quite a lot. Well, I found out, this is like very recent, but a couple of years ago, I found out my dad sees auras. And like, if you met my dad, there's not even like 1% of hippie in my dad. Or you might consider like the kind of classic traits of someone who might do auras for a living.
Yeah.
Nothing against it. But he sees auras physically, and he will literally, if you ask him, he can say, you have today a purple aura, and it's this sort of vivid, and it goes out this far. And I'm like, that's insane. So maybe it's amazing. Like, I don't see auras, but I definitely feel energy, and I can see energy. Like if I walk into an environment with a bad energy in the room, or I meet someone, I just don't connect with the energy. It's painful for me. Whereas some people, and definitely you one of these people, Taylor, and I've only met you on video call, so I'm sure in real life it's even more powerful. But like sunshine people that light up rooms, right? And I always used to talk about this, like two types of people, very obviously generalist, but there's batteries and drains. And batteries, like you're probably people, if you think about you're going to go and meet someone, you're going to meet them, you're already feeling positive.
Yes.
And then like you see them from across the road, and you're like lit up. Yeah, exactly. You spend time with them, and you walk away just like energized. And then there are people who are drains, and it's obviously for you, right? Not saying they walk around being drains, but you're not looking forward to seeing them. You'll probably try and find an excuse not to. When you see them, they kind of just drain the energy out of you, and when you're finished talking with them, you just feel completely flat. So radiators and drains. So for me, it's about what is emotional intelligence. Is about being consciously aware that we are emotional beings, that we are basically a bunch of humans just trying to do great things, and be able to pick up on how other people might be thinking. And I think probably in the psychology side of it, it's about like the NLP thing, which is the map. Have you know much about NLP?
No.
I know very little about NLP. So anyone listening to this that's a practitioner will be like, right, okay, come on then. Let's show me what you got on NLP.
Yeah.
I've very, 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 very loosely studied it and do find it fascinating. But there's a line in NLP, which is neuro-linguistic programming, basically how we program our brains through language and learn the world, which is the map is not the territory. So that's like the explanation of NLP. The map is not the territory, which on its own sounds very, very strange. But what it means is we have a map of how the world is. But that doesn't mean that's how the world is. It's just our map. So myself and you might go to a restaurant and we would order exactly the same food, and we would taste that food and have a completely different experience of it. I might love it, you might hate it. Music, we might hear the same piece of music and have a completely different impression of it. So the map, which is how you see the world, is not how the world is. And everyone has their own map. So if you go around understanding that everyone has their own map, so I'm not right, you're not wrong, you're not wrong, I'm not right, is a really great starting point to show a bit of emotional intelligence, because then I'm not going to get upset if you don't agree with me on something. I'm going to go, I'm fascinated to understand how you see this world, because I know I'm just seeing my map, but the territory is different.
Wow.
I think that's really, really powerful way of dealing with it, because what is emotional intelligence? Realizing that you're not right, They're not wrong. That
Mm.
you just might know more information than them, and half the
Mm.
time, probably one of you just has some information that the other one doesn't have, or there's a load of values, biases, and stuff that's been led in that you're never going to agree on. But fundamentally, people are people with their own experiences, and that's why they think and feel and act and behave and make you feel in certain ways.
And it's kind of like that picture where you've got two people stood opposite each other, and there's like a 6 in the middle, and one of them's like, it's a 6. The other one's like, it's a 9. It's like, you're both right, but you're just both looking from a different perspective.
Yeah, exactly. I think most arguments come from people believing they're right and someone else is wrong. Most upset comes from people believing that someone's wrong to have done something, or someone's an idiot, all that sort of stuff. Or most arguments actually become about a word that someone's thrown. Let's say you're having an argument with your wife, which obviously you would never do. But my wife's Italian, so we can argue. So most arguments, halfway through, you'll say something like, I don't know, something, and then a word will come in, and then that word becomes the problem, because in their world, that word is a completely different association to you, or they'll say something about you with a word, and you're like, oh, how could you say that word? Just because, and you need to understand that certain words and triggers and all those sorts of things. So I don't really have a succinct, wonderful, clear dictionary definition of emotional intelligence, but I think it's just knowing that people are emotional. No one's right, no one's wrong. And that fundamentally, if you can put yourself kind of in someone else's shoes and try and see the world through their eyes, probably most of the time you're going to get a much better outcome than if you try and enforce your beliefs and views and opinions on someone else. And that's just going to cause a load of conflict.
To be honest, I didn't really want a succinct dictionary answer. Like, that was perfect. I think the map is not the territory is very profound. I really like that.
Not my work.
That's absolutely fine. That's absolutely fine. Wow. I really like that. I really, really like that. So you've just started Tick Talent.
Yeah.
So you said in like this month, April, or last April?
Yeah. So we were building in March, and then we launched properly on the 1st of April.
That's amazing. Congratulations. Congratulations. So what are you looking forward to next with Tick Talent?
Yeah. So it's funny. So I always have a business plan, and I have a target to achieve this year. But I honestly think in year one with any business, the job is to survive. If I can still have my business in a year's time, what I would have had to have done that year in terms of, convincing people that they can trust me with their roles and to work with them, and then to do a good enough job to find the right people and for those people to be successful. It's really hard to build something from scratch. So if I can survive in year one, that would be amazing. But the goal is to have an amazing business that I love, that people love to work with. Really small number. It's like the Jerry Maguire thing. A really small number of select clients that you absolutely love, you really believe in, that you've got a really strong relationship with. You're not a supplier. You're a proper partner for them, friend to them, and it's just a pleasure to work with them. Because I think in recruitment, the worst thing in the world, and it's obvious when you attach remuneration to success, i.e. placing people, that some people might just want to place people and just get people in. But that, for me, would be complete failure if we place someone into a business and then that business didn't get what they wanted from that person, or the person didn't like the business and it wasn't success. That would be incredibly painful for us and for me. So the vision is to build a business that I absolutely love, where everyone hears the word Tick Talent and loves it. We start to build a very small niche reputation as being really strong in our field, helping a load of people. And then those people just keep coming back with new challenges, questions and problems as and when, and become a bit of a trusted advisor. Very simply being someone that people trust to get advice from, to help them to achieve their goals. And we mainly work with the startup community. So big businesses are less attractive to us just because their vision is so far away from the original founding story I love getting in at that really early stage where you're talking to either the founder or the senior leadership team, and they're building something, because that journey of building something is just absolutely beautiful. And I joined a business when it was very small, and it became a global, 450 person business with offices around the world. And that journey was amazing to be part of. So we love working with those sorts of businesses. So if we can work with some incredible people and incredible businesses who need some incredible people who have incredible careers, that would be success.
That's awesome. And we'll put the link to your company in the show notes and everything like that, and it would be great for people to connect with you. So just awesome. Just as we close, what's the best advice that someone's given you about leadership?
Yeah, so lots of different advice. Single piece of best advice, probably the one that springs to mind, is Mark Phelps, who told me your job as a leader is to make the people above you and below you successful.
Oh.
And I was like, that's very powerful, because then it just takes you out of the equation.
Out of it.
And if you spend all your time trying to make your boss's life easier, make them achieve their goals, and your team be successful, have fun, grow, then you get taken care of yourself. You don't have to think about it. So that's probably the single best piece of advice I've had.
That's great. Thank you so much. Thank you for being here today. I've really enjoyed our conversation, and I'm sure everyone listening in will very much enjoy it too. Really appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you. Pleasure.
And thank you all for listening as well. And we will catch you guys on the next episode. Goodbye.